Thank you all for coming on as short a notice as it was. I know there's a lot of interest in the content of this meeting, so without further ado, I will call this specially called State Committee meeting of the Democratic Party of Arkansas to order. I will ask our Vice Chair of Counties, Dean Flanagan, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand and face the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You can be seated.
Thank you, Dean. I will now ask our Democratic National Committee woman, Casey Somerville, to lead us in a moment of prayer.
Good morning. Would you please bow with me? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to come and gather and handle business. We thank you for those who have traveled from far and near. We ask, Lord, that the things that we do here today be acceptable to you, Lord. We pray, Lord, that you would guide our hearts, that you would guide our minds, and that you would guide our decisions. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray that things are done decently and in order. We pray, Lord Jesus, that you will help us to keep the main focus. In Jesus' name, I pray this prayer. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Casey. Just some informational things for you. This is a specially called meeting with a limited agenda, so the typical approval of the minutes from the last meeting and issues of that nature would be done at the next regularly scheduled meeting where we approve those minutes as well as the minutes of this meeting. There is a lot to talk about, and I know we're all anxious to get to that in discussions with party leaders, friends, legal counsel. I am here. I am the chairman, and I'm happy to address any questions, but I do not think it would be proper for me to chair the meeting. I do not think it would be proper for a number of reasons. The current officers, because of the open and independent investigations that are going on. Senator Joyce Elliott has agreed to chair this meeting, but this state committee must approve that. You approve that by a motion to suspend the rules strictly for the purposes of allowing Senator Elliott to chair this meeting. I need someone to state their name. Zane Chenault, Washington County, makes a motion to suspend the rules solely for the purposes of allowing Senator Elliott to chair this meeting. Is there a second?
Second. Diane Scritchfield, Union County, second the motion.
Thank you, Ms.
Scritchfield.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on that motion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you all. At this time, the chair of the Special State Committee meeting, Senator Joyce Elliott.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure, like most of you, this is not the way I intended to spend this Saturday. As I've been saying to several people, this is the one I had on my calendar to sleep in. So I am here all about business, and I just want to say a few things because I know this is a charged atmosphere, and I'm never a person to get into pretenses. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss what all of us saw from the Blue Hog Report because people want responses to that. I think that's proper, and that is the one thing that we will be discussing. I will ask the chair to just walk us through at a point here in a few minutes what the findings have been. I have not made a public statement about anything. I have not been in any of these meetings about anything. So I come to you this morning as a person who just wants to be what I always strive to be, fair to everybody. And fairness to everybody means we're going to stay on the subject. We will have a time where you can ask your questions, or if you want to say something with your time allotted. And because this is a meeting where everybody has lots of desires for you to ask a question or say something, that's going to have to be timed. That's my decision, so that we can be fair to people. And if that doesn't work for you, then obviously you have the right to overrule the chair. So I'm going to try to look at it in terms of desire of people who want to talk and gauge the time so that everybody who wants to ask a question or say something with their time allotted, so they can do that. So probably when we get to that point, I will either ask you to, if you want to ask a question, please ask. I'm looking at 60 seconds or 90 seconds, like 1 minute or 1 minute and a half. If there are a whole bunch of people, I will ask, we'll hold it to a minute. So you need to be thinking about it if you have a question, not a speech. If you want to use your time for your speech, that's your business, but you just don't get to do both. I want to be sure we're clear on that on the front end. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, yes, go ahead.
I stated this in the executive committee, and I want to state it here, is I really do, the teacher will say it. As we were in our executive committee, and this is not unprivileged information, I want us to really stay focused on the task. Certain personal attacks and stuff like that were reported, stuff like that, I say, because we did vote to release the report in the executive committee. Let's stay to the report. Everything else, let's do our best, and remember, we are representing our counties, we are representing our constituents, and they do have a lot of information. So I ask everybody, let's stay to form, okay? And let's keep our idle talks to minimum, because it is going to be hard to hear, and it's hot in here. So.
All right, and so Dustin, would you please state your name and your county, whoever you are, for the purposes of the minutes? We have to get things.
Dustin Parsons, Saline County Chair.
Now, does anybody else have a question about, okay, process, go right ahead.
Sorry,
no.
Senator Elliott, Christine Irwin Jimenez from Benton County. I just would like to make a quick motion to suspend the rules to allow our executive committee members to remain present and be able to participate in the proceedings for this session, since some executive committee members are not also state committee members. And we were not able to, we ended our session early.
Okay, okay, hold on 1 second. Somebody who is a member of the committee is going to have to make that motion. Of the state committee.
I am a state executive committee member.
Okay, all right.
Second.
Will you state your name again, because I don't think she got it.
Christine, she's got it.
Okay, all right. She knows you. Okay.
What's the motion?
Hold on 1 second. I'll ask her to repeat it, and then I'll repeat it to you so you hear it, okay? Go ahead.
So the motion is to allow our executive committee members to remain present and able to participate in the proceedings for this session.
Did you hear that? The motion is to allow executive committee members to remain present and participate in the proceedings for this session. And suspend the rules to do that. Now, are there any other questions? All right. So, okay. So, go ahead.
Second. That was a second.
So we have to suspend the rules first. By the way, we do have a parliamentarian here, and we have the rules committee person here, so I don't have to try to do all this stuff. But that has to be a motion to suspend the rules. All of those in favor of suspending the rules so that the executive committee members can remain here and participate, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. All right, so be it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, do we have to vote on we have finished? That's all we need to do, Mr. Parliamentarian, for that, just suspend the rules. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions about procedure? Yes?
As a member of the Democratic Party, I have been informed today that I have no right to speak because I am not a committee member, even though I carry a proxy from that committee member.
Well, it's my understanding, if you are not a member of the state committee, you can't carry a proxy for somebody, but I'll check to make sure that's right or wrong. Is that right or wrong? That's correct.
But you just suspended the rules to allow.
To allow them to participate.
That's correct.
Yeah. It's the executive committee that we have suspended the rules to allow the executive committee to participate.
Okay, I'm asking for another suspension.
you have to have somebody on the committee to make that motion. If you're not on the committee, then you can't make a motion that the committee has to vote on.
Point of information,
Yes,
is the participation allowing those executive committee members to vote or just to speak?
just to speak. Because they don't
Thank you.
have a, yeah. Well, the chair is telling me y'all ran out of time in the executive committee to resolve that in the executive committee. It was not as if somebody said they can't do it, they just ran out of time. All right? Is there anything else about procedure? If not, we will proceed to carry out the meeting. So what I think is going to be what I suggest that we do, and if you want to get your questions answered, it depends on how long this is going. If we might have to stop at some point, because I have no idea what the report, how long it is or what it's going to look like. But if we are on a particular subject that is going, say, 20 minutes or something like that, I will exercise the discretion to stop and get questions about that then. But if we can go through the whole thing in a pretty swift pace, we can wait till the very end. So I will now, unless there's anything else I need to attend to, Mr. Parliamentarian, that we're ready to go. So with that, I will ask the chair to please come to the podium and explain, to do two things. Explain what the process has been up to now to get us where we are with any kind of investigation that has gone on. And then, of course, if you will please walk us through what those findings have been. And if I interrupt you at some point, because I don't want people to go to sleep while they're listening, I might stop and say, let's answer some of the folks' questions.
Senator, with your indulgence, can we recognize Dr. Barth to explain the process?
Sure. Okay. So the chair has asked if I would ask the Jay Barth, who is the chairperson of the Rules Committee, to explain what the process has been to get us to where we are now. All right? So that everybody has clarity. That'll help me too, because I haven't heard it either.
All right, my role is going to be pretty short here because I am going to ask the DPA Council, Annie Depper, who has really, in coordination with me, in collaboration with me, kind of coordinated this entire independent investigatory process to take the lead at this point and talk about how we got to where we are today, including the actions that happened in the executive committee recently that releases additional information to you that you're going to have for your to inform your questions that you may have today.
Hello, everyone. I know some of you, many of you I do not. I'm Annie Depper, and I'm the legal counsel for the DPA. And I want to go through with y'all kind of how we arrived at this point. As many of you are aware, some may not be aware, but Matt Campbell published in the Blue Hog Report on August the 6th, I believe, a post in which he made multiple allegations against the DPA. Also made multiple allegations against individuals in the DPA. The chairman took those allegations very seriously, and he asked that I begin an investigation into those allegations. Subsequently, some people expressed concern that I may have a conflict or I may be biased in conducting that investigation. Now, I disagree with that. My intent was to conduct an extensive investigation, a fair investigation, but we certainly want all of you to know that it has been a fair investigation. And we don't want anyone to think that it was tilted one way or another. So in discussions with Dr. Barth, we decided to bring in an independent attorney to conduct that investigation. The second question was, who would do that investigation? What attorney are we going to bring in to do that investigation? Now, there were kind of a number of competing interests we had there. One, we knew we wanted a thorough investigation. Two, we realized that it had to be done quickly. We know people want answers. And so those were, two of the things that we were really taking into consideration. We also wanted a law firm that had a stellar reputation and had attorneys in it that we knew could handle the investigation. Through correspondence with Dr. Barth again, we landed on the law firm of Schultz and Adams. There were a number of reasons behind that. Schultz and Adams has experience in banking and finance regulation. They were also a firm that, when I spoke with them, could jump right in, and we knew that this needed to be done quickly. We also knew that it would take a lot of manpower. They had a number of people to interview, they had a number of documents to look at, and that law firm had 4 attorneys who could jump in. And that law firm is Steve Schultz, his son Peter Schultz, John Adams, and then Peter's wife, Amanda Orcutt, who has handled internal investigations as an attorney before. So we felt like they were a really good choice. So I was in correspondence with them throughout this past weekend. On Monday, we signed a letter of representation and they started their investigation. And we gave them carte blanche. We said, y'all look at these allegations in the Blue Hog Report and y'all investigate it. Anyone you want to talk to, talk to. Any document you want to look at, you look at it. You can come to us for documents, you can reach out to other people for documents, you can contact whoever you want. If you need contact information, you come to us. The only restriction that was placed on their investigation is that in that Blue Hog Report, there were allegations of campaign finance issues against the chairman, Michael John Gray. Those are currently being handled by the State Ethics Commission. In correspondence with Dr. Barth, we decided that it wasn't appropriate for us to conduct an investigation into that while there is currently being an investigation done in front of the State Ethics Commission. So we left that for State Ethics Commission, but we said for them to look into anything, any allegation with respect to DPA finances, in respect to anything that was done by a DPA employee in the DPA. So we engaged them, gave them that scope. We asked that they have a report done by yesterday evening, and they had their report done by yesterday evening. Something else that y'all need to keep in mind as you look at this investigation is ongoing. Chris Burks, the former DPA counsel, has filed 2 grievances. One I've received in the mail, the other I have not, although I have seen. Those grievances, because they came right after the Blue Hog Report and have some allegations that perhaps are intertwined, I'm going to leave that to the investigators to determine. We handed those to the investigators as well. My hope was that they would have all of that ready for us last night. Unfortunately, with the task that they had, they were unable to get it all done. What they did complete was their investigation into the Blue Hog Report. They assure me that the investigation into Chris Burks' grievances will be done around the middle of next week. So I am still awaiting that report. But they also said, we've been working day and into late nights, so they are out there getting it done for us. It's just taking a little bit more time. So with that, we have the written report for you today. The executive committee decided in executive session to release that to all of y'all, which I think is appropriate. As we discussed in the executive committee, this is a party, I hope, of openness and honesty about ourselves. And so I think it's appropriate that you all see that. So that's the background, that's kind of the scope of the investigation. And I will pass this along back to Senator Elliott.
Does anybody have an open seat beside you anywhere? But in case I see one, has 1, 2, 3, 4, in case somebody wants a seat, if you will tell people that when they come in as well. There are some seats around here, so thank you. You're welcome to hold up that wall, though, as long as you want to. That is not a problem. All right. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get into the report itself. So, Mr. Chair, have we missed anything? That was all of it, I think. Yeah, so if you will, yes. You have the reports to distribute? Okay, so we'll just hold up a minute while you distribute the reports. And so, yes.
Could you confirm that we have a quorum here?
The question was, can I confirm that we have a quorum here? Let me see if I can do it this way. How many people does it take? What do we need for the quorum?
20%.
20%. Now, you need to be sure if you are, I guess if you are a visitor, you sat in another section. But will everybody who has, okay. So I've just been told by the folks who were checking people in that we do have a quorum, but everybody who has a badge and you're a voter, would you just hold it up just so we can get a look around you so you can so you can feel okay about it. All right. And you're not voting unless you've got one of these. Thank y'all so much. So those are being passed out, and so that you'll have time to look at them. All we can do right now is just suspend, so you have time to do some review. Although, I do not expect that you're going to do an entire review because she's going to walk you through it. But we have to get these passed out.
Several side meetings going on to discuss whether they can prevent me from live streaming right now. I cleared it with Annie Depper ahead of time, so everyone was informed that this was going on. But there are several members walking around trying to decide if they could stop me from showing this. And the consensus was that no, they cannot.
We are going to, two things. We're going to come back for discussion, so you can engage yourself at 10:35, just so you'll know. And you need to know that, and I know some people around the room are live streaming, so those of you who need to know that, just in case that bothers you. If it bothers you, that's too bad, because people have a right to live stream, but I want you to know that we're doing that. But at 10:35, we will get started back, okay? Members, if you just give me just a second, this is my first time seeing this report as well, so what I'm trying to figure out real quickly right now is a way to address this report in parts, because it's in parts of Roman numerals, and then we've got A's and B's and C's. And what I'm trying to figure out to do real quickly, and if the Rules Committee Chair and the parliamentarian can help, I want to look at this in terms of, because I want to tell the audience how we're going to do it in parts. Like, should we do it in parts of findings? Like here we've got on page 3. You can follow along with this, we'll just talk out loud. Like on page 3.
There are 4 sections, A, B, C, and D. So through page 9, I think those are all interrelated because they are all related to compliance. Then there is section E, which is a distinct issue. And then on page 11, section F is a distinct issue. And then, of course, the full Roman numeral 4, the recommendations. Those are kind of a set.
So that will leave us at 4 sections. We'll have 4 sections of questions. We have 4 sections of giving an overview from the chair. And then after each one of those sections, we'll have if you have a question about that section, it makes sense to get that question at that time, so we don't get it mixed up in everything else. Everybody with me? Hold on, just 1 second. I'll be with you just 1 second. So it is going to be really crucial, since we're going to do it that way, so we are not in here forever, that don't put me in a position of having to cut you off when your time is up. Let's be respectful of one another and do this the right way. Yes?
Madam Chair, would you just put a clarification, this is the report we're going to discuss?
Yes, this is the report that we're discussing. Did you guys get this in the executive committee this morning?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
There was another report being passed out, but I just want, since they're both in sections, I think we just want to clarify.
Well, the report we are discussing, at the bottom of it, it has the law firm that was used with Stephen Schultz and John Adams and et cetera. That's what we're discussing this morning, right now. Okay.
What's the other report?
There was another document passed out, and
By whom? Wait a minute, what are you talking about, another document?
there was another packet passed out by an individual, and we're
That's inadmissible.
right. It's
Oh, okay. I don't know what this is, but this is not what we passed out. And if some, and to that end, when you ask, it's okay whatever's out here is out here. It's a free country. But this is not what we are discussing. I want to be clear about that. And so we're going to be on the section by section on this report. So when you ask questions, that's where your questions are to come from. Whose is this? I'm just, okay, all right, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So let me just find out real quickly. On the first, I'm on page 1. where we talk about engagement, investigation, and everything. To me, that looks pretty much like, a table of content. I want to be clear, does anybody have any kind of question about that part before we get into what I think is the meat of the report? Okay, yes, go ahead. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, will you please stand up, state your name.
So I hear you, Hayden Channel, Garland County, and I'm on page 2-6. I mean, this is repeated at the end of the report. So on 6, several minutes of DPA committee meetings are available. Do we have a list of which minutes are missing?
Thank you, Hayden. The minutes that were provided were the minutes that Teresa had been able to compile since you guys elected her secretary. The former secretary, Mosey Boyd, was in possession of the minutes during her tenure, and she was in possession of Ms. Karen Garcia's minutes. Ms. Karen did, as we should all do, transition the documents to Mosey. We, Teresa, multiple times, and myself, reached out to Mosey. We got them last night. Teresa now has them. They will be given to the firm after this meeting.
Yes. State your name and
Sam Grubb, Pulaski County. On page 3, section H, just a point of clarification. Attempted to contact means that they were not contacted, correct? That they were not a part of the report.
They did not respond.
They did not respond.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Yes.
Sheila Bell, Crawford County. Let's back up to the minutes just for a second.
Okay.
Are we to understand from this conversation that a signed copy of the minutes are not of each committee meeting or executive committee meeting are not in the DPA headquarters? They stay with the secretary?
Well, that is a very good question, and that, as in my time as chair, I've requested of the officers that they stay in the DPA headquarters. That was not always done. It wasn't always done in the past for reasons just like this. I've requested. I hope that we all learn the lesson of why it's so important and not simply a micromanaging issue from central office.
Karen Garcia, Garland County, and the former secretary. And in 2015 and 16, I sent to staff at that time copies of all of the minutes that were given to Mosey and a secretary book. Prior to that, I wasn't given any. Steve Jones resigned, and I never received anything from him.
So just for clarification, Mr. Karen, I dug through the archives in the last 2 days, and this is the book you gave to staff that had your year. So.
All right. You're welcome. Anything else on this section? If not, we will go ahead now to page 3. Page 3 at the bottom of the page with the findings, section A. So, Mr. Chair, if you will just, because everybody is looking at this as we go, I'm not asking you to go line by line by line, but give us an overview of what's there, then we'll let people ask their questions or how much you're prepared to talk about it at this point. And then we will stop at the end of this section, which is going to end on page 9. Yeah, page, I'm sure I got it right. Yeah, it's going to end in the middle of page 9, everybody. This is the section we are discussing right now, up through page 9.
You say you want questions during this review?
No, we will do this review, this section, and then if people have questions about this section, we'll take those questions then, so we don't get all mixed up as we're going. Everybody clear? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, the first allegation or finding on page 3 at the bottom was the first allegation that the first quarter report 2018 was wrong when first filed and then amended twice. The independent firm then, for addressing that specific allegation, gives you some background on the compliance issues as a whole. I will do my best to summarize that as best I can. Many of you may have heard this before, some of you have not, but the compliance company that was engaged by the party when I became chair in March of 2017 they were already engaged by the party when I became chair in March of 2017 and had been doing work for the party. At a point, we had reached out to them because the deadline for a filing, we file our state reports manually. We take them to the Secretary of State's office and file them manually. Our FEC reports are filed electronically. At a point, we had not received the state report from the compliance company. Karen Coleman, who in her capacity as operations, reached out to me and said, I think we have a problem. They're not being responsive. We continued to reach out to them. We reached out to a former employee or contractor of that company who had handled our compliance in the past. We exhausted every means of reaching out to the compliance company with no response. At that point, our report was late because they had no compliance, and there are some former employees in the room from chairs previous to me, but I no point during my tenure, and I do not think during Chairman Insulaco's tenure, that compliance was done in-house. I could be incorrect, and if I am, I apologize. We, in conversation with counsel, with Neil Reeve, who is our compliance attorney on the federal level, pointed us to Paul Huftailing of Political CFOs. Paul is one of the preeminent compliance people, does compliance for a number of state parties as well as a number of large campaigns. Paul engaged Blair Schumann, who was a former contractor for the compliance company that we dealt with, to help address the issue that we had with the compliance company that did not file the report on time. So that is why the report was late. It was amended because we filed as fast as we could a report that just reported the totals upon the advice of Paul Huftailing, Blair Schumann, and then took the time to amend it to correctly reflect the transactions that should be on that report. That's why it was amended. Most of these issues in this section, the amended reports that without all the information would indicate some deficiency either on the preparer, and I think was some deficiency on staff in the office. I want to reiterate that compliance is not done in the office. So when we engaged Blair to address the issue of the late report, he then looked at how the company had been filing our reports after he had left their employ. He discovered that the compliance company had been filing them incorrectly in previous times, and that gets to your next, one of your next allegations. And I apologize, there's just so much of it. So the number of amended reports that you see in the accusation that you see discussed here are a direct result of a failure of the compliance company. Before you asked that we had reached out to and explored legal options for the ramifications of their failures and their failures to file on time and for their mistakes. That costs money too, frankly. At that point, all of our interests, including council at the time, was to make sure it was right going forward and have the best possible compliance company we could have addressing it. That is a little bit of background and also gets into number 2, which is why that report was late. I suspect that the bulk of your questions are going to come from section 3 in this first finding. The amended report, as it references Katie McFarland, Steele James, and Darrell Stevens. When we first say, with regard to Darrell Stevens, that I apologize to Darrell that his name is coming up in this. He is a candidate currently for office. There is no wrongdoing by Darrell. It is simply an accounting issue for which Darrell submitted a check and then it was returned to Darrell. With compliance, you have to match that with your accounting. So once we took the check in, we had to report that we received $3,000 from Darrell Stevens. When we returned the check, we had to show that we gave Darrell Stevens $3,000. It is simply an accounting entry. It is not a contribution or any other form of campaign donation to Darrell Stevens. With regard to Katie McFarland and Steele James, there are 2 separate issues. I want to take the easier one first. It was suggested that while the DPA listed in-kind contributions to Katie McFarland and Steele James, that they had not, in fact, reported those contributions on their reports. It is my understanding, strictly hearsay, that in the case of at least Steele James, those reports he has amended, and I don't know. That is only hearsay understanding. Be clear. When someone or an entity makes a contribution to a campaign, when the DPA writes a check to a candidate or otherwise gives in kind to a candidate, we record it. We report it. But we have no authority to require the candidate or the receiver to document it according to the rules that they fall under. We documented it correctly from the Democratic Party of Arkansas. To the bigger issue in number 3, these were in fact in-kind contributions in lieu of filing fees. The reason the reports were amended was in conversations with the Secretary of State, multiple conversations with the Ethics Commission and Council. There was some discrepancy on whether a filing fee constituted a campaign contribution. Ultimately, it was decided that it should be recorded as a campaign contribution, and that's why you see the report amended to reflect that. Once again, for good or for bad, it needed to be on the report and open to discuss. A former employee waived the filing fees of those 2 candidates. And ultimately, as the chair of the party, I have responsibility for the employees of the party. It was addressed. It was discussed with party leaders. We were very clear that we would be transparent in this process. And that is the story, that is the finding of this independent investigation as they looked into that. Item B, on page 7, the bottom of page 7. It is alleged that the fourth quarter state report showed a large discrepancy in itemized contributions and total contributions. Once again, the independent investigators reiterate that these reports were not created by any staff member of the Democratic Party of Arkansas, but these were created by the compliance company and submitted electronically to the Arkansas Secretary of State. It was later discovered, and I want you to be real clear in understanding that the website was missing 4 pages of that report, which would have made the contributions and the totals in line. In conversation with Blair Schuman and the Secretary of State's office, we determined that all the pages weren't uploaded. However, as you see, the independent investigators were not completely able to determine how it occurred, but they did not find any evidence of internal omission of evidence, and they could not find any evidence of any consequence to the DPA that those 4 pages were missing on the website for a certain amount of time. Item C is where I got ahead of you a little bit, and I apologize. Those would be the amended reports that Blair Schuman, once we discovered the issues and terminated our relationship with the compliance company, that he saw fit to go back and amend to correctly reflect the backup contributions and expenses on that report. Item D. It is alleged that the Democratic Party of Arkansas mishandled the payment of 2 Federal Election Commission fines. Specifically, the report shows an incorrect address for the first fine of $7,900, and separately a $10,400 fine made 50 days late. The independent investigators spoke to the federal compliance attorney, Neil Reef. What is not here, but what I think you should know, is these were not FEC fines triggered by any current member of the staff of the Democratic Party. These were not FEC fines generated by any current officer of the Democratic Party. These were ongoing investigations by the FEC from the 2014 and 16 cycles that we addressed that I addressed when I was elected chair in 2017, and that these officers became aware of when they were elected. There were many conversations about both these fines. Let's get to their findings. There was no discussion by Mr. Reef or any other discussion from the Federal Election Commission found by these independent investigators that having the incorrect address on the report negatively impacted the Democratic Party of Arkansas. And once again, the reports are not created in-house. As to the second issue of the 50 days late, the investigators found that there was some confusion, and they did this with a documentation of emails and conversations with attorneys and I guess everyone else they talked to, that while the fine was late, there were no negative ramifications for the DPA that it was late, and the question of the deadline was one that was appeared to be an honest mistake. I believe, oh no, we've got, do you want to stop there? Stop it, stop.
So that takes us down through the middle of the page of page 9. So what I will do is to try to have some kind of order of this. I'll go a question on this side, a question on this side, if that works. So I'll start with this side, see if anybody over here has a question on this side on what we just heard a discussion from the chair about. Anybody on this side? Okay. And be sure you state loudly your name and where you're from, so we can take it in the minutes.
Karen Garcia, Garland County, and I also served as DPA treasurer from 2007 through 13. And as a little more background, Mr. Chairman, the compliance was...
Let me back up a minute. This is my fault. I needed to remind you that since I don't see anybody else standing over, that we're going to time this, so you may start over, but that was my mistake. To have I will try to go now with 90 seconds. Okay.
The compliance contracting went outside in 2007. But however, as treasurer, when they sent the information back, I had to always check it because even he had a lot of errors that had to be corrected before we filed. Is there a process for the reports now with the new contractor that they're checked and made any adjustments before filing?
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. That's a good question. As it is now and as it was then, the report is sent to myself, to John Unger, the treasurer, and ultimately to Karen to physically file if the reports that need to be physically filed. As well as, while Blair is preparing them, Paul Hufftail. So there are now 3 levels of checks in place with people who've had access to the financial transactions and to the bank accounts that can check for these discrepancies. Yes, ma'am. I will be honest with you, before John was treasurer, before Don was treasurer, before Karen Coleman was an employment of the party, I had no knowledge of the correct practices. I had a compliance company that I inherited that Tyler had worked with as his time as treasurer, and I had been given no indication that we had had issues with them.
Thank you.
All right, let me just question on this side. Let's go right here.
Yes, Wanda Young, County Chair of Union County. And I have a 2-part question. I'll try to make it quick. My first part is, today, are we up to date? Everything filed? Everything correct? Are we on track today? The second part of my question is, I would like to know who the previous firm that we were working with that was filing these incorrect reports over a period of several years. Is that the reason why we paid the fines? How much money are we talking about that we put into this organization that was filing these reports incorrectly? What has that cost the party? And are we certain that we don't want to try to get some sort of retribution from that?
Okay, that was 4 parts, but we're trying to get to all 4.
Hey, Ms. Wanda, obviously the events of this week and the events of the last couple of weeks in preparation for this have taken my focus off of a lot of things. But to the best of my knowledge, there can always be another mistake out there. But to the best of my knowledge, we are current and correct and are addressing issues. And frankly, if those guys that we're employing right now aren't going through this with a fine-tooth comb, then they're going to be out too, frankly. But to the best of my knowledge, we are current. To your second question, as it relates to the Federal Election Commission fines, I do not want to speak out of turn, but it is my understanding that those were violations found by the Federal Election Commission, not in filing, but in actions taken by campaigns, by previous to our becoming chair. I do not have all the specifics of those, but it's my understanding it did not relate to an error in a report or a late filing. To your point, at least some embarrassment and frustration, and we paid a company that wasn't doing something. We reached out, we did not pay our last invoice to them, but we ultimately determined that pursuing any further legal action would not be that beneficial.
Who are they?
Hold on. You really got to wait your turn. So in that 4th part you said about how much had it cost over the years or whatever, that's something I'm sure we'll have to go back and just find. I doubt we don't have a.
Can I expound on that?
No, you really can't, because get back in line, because I gotta be fair to everybody. I had a question over here, somebody had a question. Now, the person who was trying to ask a question, do you want to ask, I can see you, did you want to ask a question now?
Tom Dillard.
Yes,
I
Tom.
don't know who these people are.
Tom, hold on 1 second. Stay up with the secretary's trying to take the
Tom
minute.
Dillard, I'm from Hot Spring County, County Chairman. I want to know who these people are, who the principals of the companies are they Arkansas based? What's going on?
No, sir, they're not Arkansas based.
Okay. But let me say this, and I think I'm correct about this. If I'm not, somebody correct me. I think for most parties, especially the smaller ones around the country, if you're not New York or California where you have lots of money, I think the DNC recommends, or the DLCC, or somebody tries to help parties like ours have somebody who knows about compliance with the FEC. Because I can say for myself, when I ran for Congress, it's a very complicated. I specifically had to hire somebody who had expertise in following these reports, and so I don't think we can get further information. And Michael John has a better answer for you, I think, Tom. So I'm going to let him answer.
So, Mr. Dillard, I in the last state committee meeting, or at least maybe the one prior to that, we discussed the FEC fines and the reasons for some of these amended reports. If you did not hear the name then, I'll just repeat it from that meeting. It was a group called Next Level. I do not have their principal place of address. I know they're not Arkansas. I cannot remember the lady's name that was the principal of the company. I'm happy to get that information for you, but I can say that it looks like that company is not as engaged as they once were.
All right, is there a question on this side about this part? Right here.
Ethan Williams, Executive Committee, Fair and Clay County Press. I want some clarification. I'm a little confused, Chairman. You told the Executive Committee that it was a former DPA employee who waived filing fees for these two candidates. I'm on page 6 of the report. You said that you played no role in that, but you told us just a second ago that it was discussed with DPA staff for upper level. So I'm a little confused on that. And also, you said it was a former DPA staffer, but it's quoted saying, with respect to Ms. McFarland, Ms. Coleman said that she resisted but ultimately waived the fee. So I'm a little confused.
To your first part, Ethan, I discussed with party leaders and elders about that. I think that was the first part of your question. Is that correct?
Well, the Executive Committee, I asked you to play a role, you said no, and then you...
No, I did not play a role in waiving the filing fees. My discussion, to clarify, and I appreciate the clarification, my role in discussing this with party leaders was how to address it after it occurred. I played no role initially in the waiving of the filing fees. To your second part, where they report Ms. Coleman resisted, Ms. Coleman was directed by a former employee at the time. That's the answer of why her name comes up. And it was not a decision made by Ms. Coleman.
All right, question over here. Let me just, there are 3 of you up, so but in right back here, she was up first before, so go ahead.
Sheila Bell, Crawford County.
Sheila Bell, Crawford County.
Am I to understand?
Can you speak up just a little bit more?
Am I to understand? I'm little, but I do have big lungs. I just didn't want to hurt you. That the FEC nor the parties, maybe something we need to think about if we don't. There is no compliance training for our leaders as they are elected for the federal requirements. Or is there no compliance training that's required or suggested?
May I? That's a very good question, Ms. Bell. It is not required. However, in settling these amounts and coming to a settlement with the FEC, these fines were potentially going to be a lot bigger. Part of the settlement is that our staff, we would put a staff member through some compliance training, and I don't have my calendar in front of me. I know that we have one staff member that has already been through that and has another compliance training coming up within the next week to further strengthen our internal knowledge of compliance issues. But no, ma'am, there was no requirement other than in the settlement of the fine, we have just decided to beef it up even more in-house.
All right, right back here, blue shirt.
Pretty Stockton, Logan County, and just point of clarification here.
Brenda, you're gonna have to speak.
Sorry. Point of clarification here, Pretty Stockton, Logan County. Mr. Shipman has not made any mistakes, or he has, and are we convinced that he is the best person possible since he was a former staffer of the company? And I also know mistakes he's made with other campaigns, and I'm just curious to know, is he the best person possible to handle things at this time?
Thank you, Brittany, and I asked the same question because he is contracted by Paul Huff-Taylor, who is political CFOs. Paul gave me reassurance when I asked that, because I said, I was really kind of the same thing. Wait a minute, we're going to hire a guy that worked for AMS. So from Paul's description and my own eyes on what he was telling me, the mistakes occurred, the failing to file, the failing them incorrectly occurred when Blair left Next Level and she assigned someone else to handle our account. Absolutely, Blair will make mistakes. But the level of, he is now contracted through political CFOs, another level of oversight, where we are comfortable that the issues that arose were not directly related to Blair. That's a very fair question. I appreciate you asking.
They're over here this time, blue shirt.
I'm Kristen Webb from Benton County. Back to the filing fees, a lot of questions about that. For example, how is it that a staff member can direct someone to give such a large in-kind contribution? Do you plan on waiving filing fees in the future for candidates? And what really is the process for oversight for how these contributions are made and decided? Is it's just arbitrarily made by staff members? That's a huge concern.
I think those are all three very valid questions and should be huge concerns. One, I did not then, nor do I have now, any intent to waive filing fees for anyone. What I do have is hopefully in the next couple of weeks we will have an opportunity to come back together and discuss the issue of filing fees. But there's no intent to your question in the future to waive filing fees. Secondarily, and honestly, to this committee, no. There is nothing in the rules, and there should be, and I would suggest that we get an amendment to the Rules Committee as fast as we can. But there is no, unless Jay, I'm incorrect, there is nothing in the rules that precludes the waiving of filing fees. I'm not saying that to justify. I'm just informational to this committee that there is nothing in the rules that precludes that, while I think there should be. To the first part of your question, it's absolutely not my practice or belief that staff should be able to arbitrarily decide who to give contributions to and who not to. I addressed that. The employee is no longer with the party. We reported it, and we're moving on from it with an understanding, and now with your understanding, that it's something the party needs to address. And I do appreciate all three of those questions.
Okay, Susan. Susan, slow down. I think she knows who you are now.
On the executive committee, thank you. Couple of questions. So who are these higher level party members that you're conferring with when you make this decision about how to handle this situation in regard to the filing fees? Who did you confer with?
are you asking for a staff member?
No, you said you confer with high-level parties.
No, ma'am, my language is never high level. I said I've met with leaders in our party. I do not, I think it's proper to divulge private conversations with people that are leaders in our party, but I can tell you that I have respect their opinions, and many of you do too.
Well,
Second part of my question.
yes, go ahead.
Is if you've taken all these steps to ensure compliance and proper filing, why were so many amendments made in 2018?
Okay.
Susan, that's when the problem arose, and we were able to discover that there were the incorrect filings previous to that, and that's why they had to be amended.
Well, there's a woman right behind you that's been up there were several times. I've seen that red dress. Okay. Okay. Okay, all right. And then somebody, before you were up, Chris, there were people up here too, but I'll get to you. Somebody up here, right here, in the blue shirt.
Ryan Agnew, Benton County. It was mentioned that there were numerous attempts made to reach next level, but it's also stated that their principals cannot be identified. I'm wondering if we could receive a written record as opposed to just a testimony that those outreach attempts were made. Thank you.
So, Ryan, that's a good question. I want to clarify what I said. I don't recall who their principals are. In this meeting, I don't have their names in front of me. We are aware of who the principals are, and that information was provided. Ryan's a state committee member. Yeah, I thought so. Those were addressed and documented and provided to the independent investigators who compiled this report. So thank you for your question. But I want to clarify, it's not that they're unknown, I just don't remember their name at this time.
Now, we're back over here. Any other questions? Oh, okay, Frederick.
Hey, bottom of page 6, on the point where it says that Mrs. Coleman said she resisted, but ultimately waived the fee. I know that she's currently the chief of staff. Was she in that role when she was resisting?
No, sir. No, sir. She was not the senior person in the office at the time of that incident.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so paper up, so, yeah.
Blake Ross, President, Young Democrats. Section 9.12 of party bylaws states, quote, all candidates for election in public office in a Democratic primary in Arkansas are expressly prohibited from using party headquarters and or equipment to benefit his or her campaign. This prohibition includes but is not limited to postage machines, telephones, folding machines, copies, and electronic equipment. My question is, do you not believe that the section that says but is not limited to would include that by waiving the filing fee for a candidate, you are intervening in the primary?
No, I do not. Also, respectfully, I think that's moot as there was no primary election in these, but no, I do not. However, I think that if we do, and I think we should strengthen that language to more specifically reference that, to your point.
All right, anybody else over here have a question?
Kate
Okay.
Shamble, Garland County. This is the bottom of page 6 with regard to Katie McFarland's filing fee.
With regard to Katie McFarland's filing fee, $3,000. So $2,700 was said to go towards the primary, and $300 was said to go towards the general. What was the date that we put for that contribution for the $300 towards her general election campaign, if we actually gave that to her in February?
You report the date we gave them, but you're allowed to simultaneously contribute to it. It was my understanding that you're allowed to contribute to a primary and a general at the same time. But the candidate must report them that way.
So we reported the date as the date Did you do it in February?
To my knowledge, Hayden, I think the filing was in March, but
March.
yeah. But to the best of my knowledge, and I guess the investigators were able to look at the reports, they determined when we did. I don't have it in front of me, but we did file them both at the same time, one for the general, one for the, to the best of my recollection.
All right, does anybody else have another question on this side? And I see one more question back there and one here. We need to wrap it up and get to the next section, or we're not gonna get out of here. Chris, are you our state board member?
No.
Oh, well, I have to leave this to state board members.
The floor is only open to state committee members?
Yeah, to state committee members.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
I mean, if a state committee wants to ask my question respectfully.
Give it to somebody.
I'd like to just say that openly, just to see if.
No. It's not gonna be fair to folks to do that. Does anybody else over here have a question? Right here. And we're gonna have to move to the next section, guys.
The question goes back to the amended filings, and it centers around the accounting phenomena. Obviously, we brought in a new compliance company. He fixed the filing during 2018. What led him to feel compelled to go back and look at 2017, and what accounting documents is he looking at that members of the party, the appropriate members, would have access to also be reviewing? I think we're going to need more reviewing of our accounting documents, more so than just a treasurer and a chief of staff and the chair, to make this thing go right, even if we have a compliance company out there. So my question is, what compelled him to go back to 2017? Other than they were wrong, why did he not go back to 2016? And we obviously haven't gone back to 2014, nor do we want to. But what led him to go back?
Dean, at the time that they failed to file the report on time, and he dug into it, he decided to look back at the reports up until the time he was still with the company, and discovered that they had been being incorrectly filed. He also double checked himself, but they had been incorrectly filed since he had left the company. That's how he was able to determine what dates to examine.
All right, thank you so much. Did you have a question on this section? Okay, I think I did see you get up before, so just wait, get a microphone, and we'll entertain your question. And don't anybody over here, please don't get any ideas, we have to stop. He has been up before, yeah.
In regards to the waiving of filing fees.
So state your name and where you're from, please.
Ryan Carter, Clay County.
Okay.
In regards to the waiving of filing fees, what role did these staff members who approved that play in the organization? What were the titles? Also, when did you discover this action by them? And how long did they remain with the Democratic Party of Arkansas employed after that happened? And is there any specific rules in the DBA Constitution that would allow for the waiver of filing fees?
So I'm going to go back reverse order, Brian. Thank you for your question. I'll state again, I am not aware of any specific rules that preclude, nor am I aware of any specific rules that allow. I hope that answers your question. I do not believe, I appreciate the cleverness of your question, but the title of which the former employer had would reveal who that former employee is, and that's something I cannot do. I will be honest that they were not terminated immediately upon this act. I think that answers your question.
No? Okay, so we're moving to the next section. And this next section is pretty straight ahead. It's about the salary increases. And I feel the same way about section 3. These are pretty straight ahead entries, I think. So this is what I'm gonna ask you to please do. If you have a question, I'm not gonna ask the chair to go through this, but let you get your clarifications, because I think it's pretty clear. And if you have a question about something you want clarified in that section, let's get ready for questions then. And if you have a question on this section, it's time to start on this side. Anybody have a question about the salaries? Okay.
Can I make a comment rather than a question?
You may use your 60 seconds, but anything you want to, and now it is 60
I don't think
seconds.
so. So, Wanda Young, Union County, I just.
Use it. Okay, I just want to say that I don't have a question about this, but we are working really hard in Union County to get our party back up and going. We're working our tails off. I've got two of my ladies here, and we're working hard. And you know what I'm telling them? Look, we're going to go by the rules. We're going to abide by the rules. When we don't know what the rules are, we contact the state party or we contact an attorney. We've got to go by the rules, people. You've got to know what the rules are, and you've got to abide by those rules. Because the state party can't expect us to do it if they're not doing it. Okay? So that's all I want to say about that. We're going to go by the rules. We want everybody in this room to go by the rules. Thank you.
All right, anybody on this side? Yeah, that's a good comment. Anybody on this side have a question or a comment? Okay, back to this side. This somebody over here. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm just going over here. Let me interrupt. Was there a hand up and I missed it? No? Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Fair, good one, Pulaski County. It is reported on page 9 that Chairman Michael John Gray agreed to a memorandum of understanding with Ms. Coleman. It is my understanding that that is a decision left to the executive committee and not at the discretion of the chair. Is that a correct understanding?
So, Ben, I'm going to give you the best answer I can for that, and I appreciate this question. Memorandum of understanding with Ms. Coleman was to memorialize the conversation that we had when I hired her to come to work for the Democratic Party of Arkansas. If, with the chair's indulgence, I will expand on this issue that may address questions, or I'll wait till the questions become more direct.
Well, no, go ahead and expand on that.
I do not have an answer to you on whether a memorandum of understanding is improper or outside the purview of the chair versus the executive committee. I do not.
All right, to this side, anybody have a question about the salary? Okay, great.
Greg Reed, Bradley County, and I'm looking at page 10 in the report.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I was clear on this.
Get the mic here, Greg.
Okay, Greg Reed, Bradley County, look at page 10. Am I understanding that it says there, in, I guess it's the first full paragraph on that page, down near the bottom, Mr. Gray told us that the DPA's total salary number appears in line item in the annual budget. So am I understanding that within that line item in the budget, the chairman has the authority to set salaries as long as we don't exceed that line item without amendment? Is that what we're saying?
Greg, I'm not sure as to authority. What it's saying is that while they could not find that I reported individual salaries, they did find that I had reported total salaries to you guys. I don't think they nor I were speaking to the authority to do so, but rather what happened.
All right, right here.
Again, Brittany Stockton, Logan County. In terms of salary raises, is that something that the executive committee should be able to take part in? And I would also should have prefaced that question by saying I do believe that the DPS should be paid optimally. They work hard, they put in the work, they put in the hours, long hours, and they need to be taken care of.
Yes.
Thank you, Brittany. First, a little background on this, that I believe, and I'm not looking at it, so if I misspeak, I don't mean to, that one of the original assertions was that Ms. Coleman made $70,000 a year. And that was a number that made a lot of people feel uncomfortable as they investigated this. I'm looking for the number, but I think it's somewhere around 56.6, yeah, right there at the top. Now, more specifically to your question, I appreciate that. according to the rules of the DPA, it says the chairman shall prescribe salary, the advice and consent of the executive committee. It's the rules. That's what they are. What did I do is the question. My time with the party, not only as chair, but as a member of the state and executive committees, I followed the traditional custom and practice that I had seen utilized by the Democratic Party. I was never advised by council or any member of the Rules Committee that following those customs and practice was improper. However, there's a determination by the Rules Committee that following that custom and practice is improper. I stand before you as your chairman and say that there's no doubt that I gave raises and set salaries in my capacity as chair.
I need a question over here. We're over here, aren't we? Right here.
Kristen Webb, Benton County. Do you stand by your statement that the executive committee meets quarterly, so you cannot wait for executive committee meetings for every salary decision? Or do you feel like you would like to set some rules and follow them going forward?
Thank you, Kristen. I do stand by that there are times when there are opportunities to fill a gap that it may be cumbersome to get an immediate approval. I think that there's no reason we can't put processes in place with technology today, with abilities today to better address those. And Kristen, to complete transparency, the executive committee approved the hiring of a data director this morning that the personnel committee had recommended we hire. We needed a data director a month ago, and so she was on staff. So what I stand by is the process, and what I can tell you has occurred since the promotion of certain employees within the organization. While you're seeing the worst of the past, and we don't hear the 99 things that have been corrected, we hear the bad thing 99 times. There is a process. It's utilizing the personnel committee. You would hope that the personnel committee would red flag anything that would keep the executive committee from approving that employee and move forward. So my statement was simply, sometimes the process is cumbersome. That doesn't make it impossible.
All right, we had one more question over, I didn't see I'll come back to you next, because you're going to ask one. Right here in the lecture. When we get to Ethan, right here, we unless you have something, I don't see any more hands up, I think. Okay, go right ahead.
Suzanne Brunsick, State Committee, Izzard County. I just have a couple questions of clarification, just for information. I believe the rule says the chair and officers with advice and consent. And I'm just wondering, I've been in the executive committee meetings and state committee meetings, but I do not know how the officers meet. Is there a procedure where the officers meet and would discuss such a thing as personnel issues? Also, the other point I want to know is there a list of personnel with duty? Because I had asked the state party to provide me a list of the different positions and what their duties are, and I was told, because I'm not personnel, I could not get that information.
Okay.
Ms. Francis, let me go in reverse order on your second question. When I became chair, there were no job descriptions. There was no personnel policy handbook. There was no vacation policy. There was no health insurance policy. I don't fault the former chair for that. I don't fault the former employees for that. They spend their time putting out the first fire and then the next fire, and before they can put the first fire out, the next one starts. And we have a problem, we have a historical problem in our organization that hasn't been a foundation there from the beginning. I'll get to you. So, one of the things that I addressed in an earlier question from Kristen is one of the things as we promoted and shifted current staff is establishing exactly what you're asking for with some clarification. So when you asked that, they were semi-correct. Personal information about the duties is a personnel issue. An overall general description of the position should be available to you, and that's what we're working on. I will also be honest with you. Every job description, I see some former employees of the Democratic Party in here, every title that you may or may not have with the Democratic Party, it's etc. They have to wear every hat and do everything. And that has also historically been a problem within our party, and it's something we're addressing. So as to the specific information you're requesting to that, I can tell you it is a work in progress, but it's something that will benefit not only my tenure, but chairs that follow me. To your first question, and I just asked Jay, I'm not aware of any custom and practice other than in 2016 when there was an exploratory committee to hire an executive director, or a committee put up that the chairperson wasn't the person that was doing the hiring. But more specifically, Vice Chair Nicole Hart has a weekly call with the officers to understand any issues or concerns there may be, and brings them to me, brings them to staff. Sometimes they're not addressed as fast as they need to be, but there is a weekly call that the officers have that Vice Chair Hart conducts.
Could I follow up real quick?
No, he's next over here, sorry about that.
Okay, in Clay County, Ryan Carter paid a $3,000 filing fee to run for state representative. My question is, did you or did you not offer to waive the additional $1,500 of the filing fee for him to run for state senate instead of state rep?
Well, if this is not a matter of this report, so I think that's something you'll need to resolve otherwise, because it's not germane to this report, what's in the report. Anybody else on this side? You back there, sir, in the blue shirt.
Michael Prison, Pulaski County. In looking at the report for salary increases and disbursements, I want to ask, how much influence did the treasurer have in dispersing the money out to the employees?
It's a good question. The treasurer sees the balances of the bank accounts and the transactions that come out, but paychecks are direct deposit.
Well, a follow-up to that is that normally the treasurer would review the budgets and everything before things are spent out. So the report barely mentions...
Hurry, your time is running out.
Okay. The report barely mentions anything about the treasurer's influence about reviewing the budget of like the contributions and then,
Okay, that was a good question.
No, I appreciate your question. I'll say that John couldn't be here today. He's a principal, and this was the first week of school where we have a lot of things going on. But John has jumped in with both feet as he was elected, both to try to help on the fundraising side and both to have another set of eyes on the expenditure side. So it would be unfair of John to say that he wasn't involved in the decision to raise the salaries, but he does have access and can see the accounts, and is very active right now in helping be a partner in addressing the needs of financing or otherwise correct documentation that needs to come from the DPA.
All right, are there any other questions? Because let me get a line on this, because this is what I've got. I've got 2 questions on this side, and then we're going to move to the next section. Everybody good? All right, 2 questions on this side. What? Did you say 3?
where are you recommending?
Blake, who was up besides Blake? Right here, okay, yeah, that's fine. That's both of y'all have asked a question before, I was just trying to.
Blake Ross, President, Young Democrats. Regarding the advice and consent language in Party Rule 4.06 and your statement, Mr. Chairman, regarding not waiting for the executive committee meeting for every salary decision, is there a particular reason why you don't unilaterally go to the executive committee after the decision is made to either inform them that the pay increase occurred or to then seek their consent for the pay raise that you already gave?
Like, I can't speak to unilateral decisions. I'll go back to the answer previously that in my experience and in reviewing of past minutes before I was chair and my observation of custom and practices, it was not something that I'd ever seen done and wasn't aware that it needed to be done. Once I was made aware, we took that action this morning with the data director.
Right here, last question.
Sam Grubb, Pulaski County. The part of top of page 10, where it says Ms. Coleman stated that she receives no additional benefits from the DPA as part of her compensation. The question I have kind of folds into that. You mentioned that there was no health insurance in policy, there was no vacation policy, there was none of that, and that would answer that part. Yes, but is there now a attempt to make that policy, and what is the process that we're going through? Is it just, as you were saying, sort of by person slowly, or is there a committee that is working on this? And if not, can we have one?
Man, very good question. I want to be real clear. There was no written policy. Employees before my term as chair had health insurance available, had other benefits available. There are employees today that have health insurance provided through the party. Ms. Coleman is not one of those. To your second question, and frankly the meat and very important part of that, we have established a engaged personnel committee. We are continuing to pull the information together to create some kind of policy handbook, personnel policy that addresses these issues for the personnel committee that is made up of employers, employees, people with legal backgrounds, people with HR backgrounds, to address this and be able to produce something that as now, I think, to get approval from the executive and state committee, even though the rules are silent on that, to become a policy going forward.
Thank you.
We're now at section 3 on notarizations, and if anybody has a question on this, we start from this side. We start from this side, if anybody has a question. No questions here. Okay, right here, Lonnie.
Thank you. I stand as a...
Name and...
Oh, I'm Lonnie Shackelford. I'm sorry. And I'm from Pulaski County and a former state chair and secretary and so many other things with the state party. But I stand because this report ends with saying there was no improper notarization. So I think that speaks clearly for that. But I also stand because throughout this whole investigation, there's only one employee's name that has been mentioned and has gone public, which means people have all kinds of theories out there. So I would like for the record to reflect that Karen Coleman has not done anything wrong based on this report that is here. I would also like, as we continue with this report, for each of us in this room to understand one of the basic and most primary responsibilities that any chair, any officer undertakes when they come into this party is to try to keep the lights on. And for those folks to sit here and act like they're not, and everybody who comes down there is making a sacrifice, I just want to applaud each of them for what they do.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Does anybody on this side have a question about the notarizations or a comment? Anybody else on this side? Oh, go ahead.
I really have a point of information, but it pertains, that has to do with personnel, it's a point of information on personnel. Mr. Chairman, am I to understand that you have appointed a special committee to work on personnel handbook type issues?
I haven't created a special committee. It's a committee that's already prescribed for the chairman to fill per the rules, and I have appointed members to that.
So it's the
committee.
rules committee, or I'm not clear?
It's a personnel committee. A
Okay.
personnel committee, yes, ma'am.
And you've appointed people to
It's a
that?
personnel
Do we know
committee
who's
that's
on the-
required by the rules. Required by the rules, okay. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Are you finished?
No, I didn't understand the answer.
Well, what he said was there is a personnel committee that's prescribed by the rules. In the rules, it says we should have a personnel committee, is that correct? And that's what he's appointing, or has appointed.
And I'm
Okay.
saying, when will we get the names of the people that have been appointed for that? So
They're
we
on
want to
the, they're on the website.
Okay. thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
All right, does anybody over here have a question about the notarization section? Anybody else over here have a question about the notarization section? Right here.
Dean Flanagan, Sebastian County. And I guess my point and question is, it's been implied we now file electronically. When did we make that transition? Because that's not necessarily clear in the reports here. And things omitted because of paper, things omitted because of electronic. Sounds like the missing pages was electronic filing.
So, may I? No, it was a physical filing, but the Secretary of State uploads it onto the computer so people can see it. So the mistake was an upload. So to answer your question, the Federal Election Commission reports, the FEC reports, the federal reports, they are filed electronically. The state reports are filed manually, but then they are uploaded to the electronic system, not by us, but by the Secretary of State or whoever handles that.
Second question, part of this, do you intend to ever stamp a filing again?
Man, I ain't even stamping a letter.
Okay, we'll go on to the recommendations section. What I'll ask the chair to do, if something is not clear, if you intend to just look at them, say what you intend to do regarding those, and then if we have questions, we'll entertain questions, okay?
So what you see is that the recommendation is that an audit is a logical next step. What you also see is a recommendation for some tighter controls on what's going on. What I can tell you is, and a couple of the officers in the room, and I know Mayor Shackelford, where we met with the leaders from the DNC this week, the controls and the organization that are still growing and still need to be done, but that are being implemented. The organization of the structure in the office over the last 8 months, 7 to 8 months, are addressing these issues. The DNC remarked to Vice Chair Flanagan, myself, I don't remember if Vice Chair Hart was in the room or not, but I know Mayor Shackelford was, that the DNC can see a marked improvement in the organizational structure and the controls put in place in the last 7 to 8 months, which coincides, frankly, to the promotion of certain employees to certain positions. We will continue to strengthen those controls to the point that you made earlier. I do think someone should make, a member of this body, should make a recommendation to the Rules Committee specifically precluding that act, specifically prescribing the ramifications of violations of that act. I do think that a closer look at the finances, while I anticipate no issues, is necessary to give you all and those out in the general public that have been exposed to our family invite a comfort level with the Democratic Party. I will say again, when I was elected chair, I sat in front of a well-respected member of this party that I defer to most of the time. And I said, sir, the finances are bad. I'm not sure about some of the transactions, but I can tell you it doesn't look good. Some people are telling me I ought to go get an audit. Expose this whole dang deal. And he said, you're going to put your head down. You're going to go raise money. You're going to go build a staff. You're not going to divide this party any more than it already was through, y'all remember, a very divisive cherish race. I think we're in a stronger place now. I don't think an audit of the finances divides this party. I think it gives a reassurance to every one of you that we all can question whether a dollar should have been spent this way or that way, but we know where the dollars went. So as we transition, I will be honest with you, the next step in our process is the completion of by the independent firm into the allegations raised in the grievances. Bring those before the executive committee as that is their purview to discuss. On the completion of that, many of you saw, I hope all of you saw, an email from me to appoint an oversight committee to handle the administration of an audit as well as a look into our finances and as well as suggestions of tighter controls and practices. I hope that you saw that email. You did not see that description. I'm giving it to you now. I know you saw that, or I hope you saw that Johnny Roebuck agreed to chair that committee. I spoke with Miss Johnny this morning. I want to continue to have conversations with the Rules Committee and the Executive Committee on how the establishment of that committee is proper. I also do not want to fully fill that committee until this open investigation is concluded. I do not know who they intend to interview. I do not know what they intend to ask. And I'd hate to have to put you or a member of that committee in a position where they were indirectly or directly tied in an investigation that they were also supposed to be overseeing. So the conclusion of the investigation into the grievances filed and the disposition of those grievances by the executive committee, you will immediately be informed the filling of that committee. And I'm sure, as has been my experience with her, that Ms. Jones is going to keep us all up to date what's going on. I'll just be honest with you, and she's going to make sure I do. So I have no doubt that committee will be transparent in the process. We just need to get through a couple of things to make sure this is done proper. It is my intent. I want to be totally honest with this body. This report was not done for free. The next investigation that is ongoing right now is not going to be done for free. And an audit will not be done for free. And that committee will be charged with making decisions that are in the best interest of all of you, all of those that are proud to call themselves Democrats out in the state that look to us for better leadership, but also to the fiscal responsibility we all have to our party. But I will make sure that all of you are informed in that process moving forward. I'll also, I'm looking at Jesse, doesn't want me to out him, but he's right in front of me. He's on the personnel committee, Suzanne, if you want to get him. I've also reached out to the personnel committee. I asked them to stand by for a meeting this week. We could not get to it, to start addressing some tighter controls on some of these other issues that have been brought up. Not because I think anything's done wrong, but because I think it will give a comfort level going forward, not just for my tenure as chair, for anyone that follows me. So,
Does anybody have any questions regarding the last question, D? So we'll start on this side if anybody has a question about this section. Okay, in the back. Wait, the mic is coming. Okay.
Mary Richardson, Pulaski County State Committee member. I want to thank everybody that came out today for being here and listening to all of this. Some may say the Blue Hog Report came out and caused all kinds of grief, and well, here we are But I have to thank those people who wrote that, because we wouldn't be here paying more closer attention to the processes of this party. In my last 30 seconds, the situation that happened with compliance came out, remember, in the last 2 meetings. And we all sat there at those meetings and sort of listened to that, but we didn't pay close attention. And so some of now, this stuff that's coming out of the report, somebody else paid closer attention than we did. And so we have a responsibility as state committee members to do that. And so in some ways, as crazy it may sound, the Blue Hog Report coming out is helping all of us be better party members in the long run. You may not like that, you may not appreciate it, but it needed to happen for us to pay attention.
Yeah, that was your time.
And that's my time.
That was your time.
There's more to do though.
But I think something that we can all agree on, though, is that, you know, there's no point in us ever being upset or mad at the messenger, because we believe in people have, you know, rights of expression. We believe in due process. Matt has a right to a Blue Hog, and we have a right, and should be here today. I just want to make one quick observation. This is really great attendance. Now, I want to see you at the next meeting too, please. This is really very good. Okay, the next question goes over here to Lisa. He's getting his exercise.
Lisa Whitaker, Washington County, State Committee member from Washington County. I'm a pharmacist, and when I took literature review, when I got my PharmD, we looked at study design. And I noticed in who was interviewed that there are some gaps. And I hope that in our study design of the further review, that more than one person, maybe more than one committee, gets to, you know, say that's a good group of people and that it's entirely covered.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anybody over here? Over here is, wait.
No, I got one.
Okay, come on.
It's a quick one.
Okay.
Wanda Young, Union County. Do we plan as a state party to address the Blue Hog Report in any type of media? And how do you propose that we address that in Union County?
The media is in the room right now. I'm gonna bet they had that report before you got the first page. No, as Senator Elliott stated, whether, Mary, I appreciate your point, and I like seeing us all get together, but I don't know if I can say I was happy about it. But, Senator Elliott pointed out in his journalistic capacity, he has absolutely, I feel like we're responding to it in the proper way, which is bringing the membership in, not responding, looking you in the eye, doing an independent investigation to get you as much information as we can, and let that work product speak for itself.
I guess I wanted to say, we're not gonna do tit for tat.
No, we're not. No, we're not. Okay, I got a question in the back from somebody who's not had a question, so I'm going to that person first. In the red. And I'll come back up to the front.
Thank you, Deborah Mitchell, Pulaski County. I just want to I would be remiss without just saying this. Yes, the Blue Hog, but there's better ways in bringing attention to issues that you have. So people here do not come back and think they can so they can get their voices heard. Many ways. So let's make a point that if we do have an issue, there's a process in place. Pick up the phone, send an email if you have an issue. Let's not use that again as a method.
Okay, all right. Come back over here. Nothing over here. Over here. Wait. I'm going to call on Vivian because she's not had a question. And I'll get to those of you who've had one before.
Thank you, Senator. We've heard about the importance.
My name is?
My name is Vivian Flowers, State Rep, District 17, Pine Bluff, and I hope that didn't count against my time. We've heard about the importance of our coming together and being responsive, albeit reactionary, to things that were of concern, and he should. We also heard Senator Elliott talk about the importance of due process, and I think that's incredibly important, and I want to congratulate everyone here, congratulate the officers, congratulate the chair as well as Senator Elliott, because I think that in what is a really tense environment and some really serious concerns, the process has been appropriate, and the process and the tenor of this meeting, I think, have been great. I know it's not over yet, so that's a message. But I want to also congratulate the Democratic Party about how we have been transparent. As we have heard the chair mention, the press is in the room. I don't know of any other private company or organization who would invite the press in the room to hear about important information like this.
Okay, thank you.
We're Democrats, and transparency is important.
Thank you, Representative. We've got Karen and we have right here you and David. Okay, so I think it probably should be. Let me let David talk because he's not had a question or anything yet, and then we'll come to the two of you. And in fairness, we'll come to you in the blue coat first because Karen has like 3 times. So I'll go to you last, Karen. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. State Representative David Whitaker, District 85, Fayetteville. Just real quick, we've kind of, by going by section, was a wonderful organizational thing. I was wondering if we could get like a wrap of like a roadmap of where the special investigation goes from here. Will they be talking to more people? After that, what, just roughly a timetable on when we'd see an audit be discussed and begun, et cetera.
Let me do that after we get these other questions and kind of let Michael John be a part of that.
Thank you.
Sure
I won't let you forget.
Okay, all right. I won't forget, I promise you. So we were, right, yeah. Ryan.
Little bit of a husband and wife situation.
Okay, so
Gayatri Agnew, 3rd Congressional District Rep for the API Caucus. And Madam Chair, if it's within the bounds to make a motion, I move to ensure there is an independent financial audit of the Arkansas Democratic Party.
I'll take that motion, but let me get all the questions, but I will accept your motion.
You'll
Just
hold
hold
the-
on to it. Yes.
Thank you.
I certainly will. Yes. And
Ryan Agnew, Benton County.
that was really a do-over. Okay, I'm gonna say she used 30 seconds. All right, go ahead.
Thank you for taking our questions. It's hot here. I'm sure it's very hot over there. I was too busy playing gotcha earlier about forgetting the names of the next level folks, but what I was asking for was records of the outreach to that group to show that, because we have a report by a law firm that y'all paid to write a report that puts it on them. So I'd like to know more about them.
Okay.
Thank you very
I
much.
just wanted to know, it's a report that the party paid for. I want to be clear, there's no y'all here, okay? The party paid for it.
Ryan, they were, good question. I'm sorry, I didn't understand completely when you asked earlier. They were provided that documentation. That's how they came to this. I will speak to Jay and to legal counsel about how the proper way to disperse that to you guys. If there's nothing improper about doing that, there's no reason not to be able to. So I'll check on that. Sorry, I didn't understand that further.
My fault.
All right. Karen?
Karen Garcia, still
Wait,
from Garland
Mike is
County.
coming though, so hold on.
And I wanted to say I stand, not to make any accusations, but to offer assistance and help. It became very clear to me today that prior records from 2015 were not readily available for the officers and staff, and there were procedures adopted. I have copies of several over the years because I also served on the Budget and Audit Committee prior to becoming treasurer, and we had also, while I was treasurer, we had internal audits besides the FEC. But I served 6 different chairmen, and it seemed like each time we had turnover in staff, we'd lose things. And I don't know what happens to them, but we'll work on that. But I have procedures that were adopted that some made it into the minutes, but I see some didn't. They're processes, procedures that aren't part of the rules. And I will send those and offer any training or assistance in the office.
That's great, Karen, because I know personally that you have done that, and you are a font of institutional memory, and that is really important. That is really, really important. Okay, somebody over here has a question. Let's see. In the back in the black shirt. I should remember it.
Rodney Govins, State Committee Member, Lonow County. Mr. Chair, I know that's a hot seat up there. I don't envy you at all. You got a tough job. But on page 13, one of the first sentences kind of outlines a management issue that's beyond the scope of our engagement. In addition to these recommendations that we see here, what's the chair's plan to correct some of the issues that are documented as well as not documented going forward?
Right, that's a good question. I appreciate it, Matt. It is hot up here, so I'm not sitting in that seat. But first, the management issue, to answer why they said it's not part of their scope, they were charged with investigating the specific allegations. So, but to your question, and I think the more important part of your question, is what are my plans to address what they found are some management issues. What I will go back to, and I don't care if anybody, I know how this answer is going to be received in some places. The first step I did was make Karen Coleman Chief of Staff. And it's been more well organized in that office since I did that. Processes have been used. We are not perfect yet. There are mistakes that have been made. There have been issues that any office would have that have to be corrected. But her attention to the detail in the organization and utilizing the committee process. I'm not saying that as the Chief of Staff, there's not times she gives you an answer you don't like. That's going to happen. But she has that office way more organized. The current staff, and I'm sorry, Karen, for only calling you out, but the team at the DPA, as they're working, as we've evolved to this day, and their ability to work together and understand, while the process may be cumbersome, or while the process may not always be the desired outcome, that utilizing the process is the best way to keep a lot of those controls and address some of these management issues. So, yes, the first step was promoting her to that position. I have seen improvement in the performance. Some of you may not realize, but some of the things that you're engaged in and utilized in are a direct result of Karen making sure that we utilize the process and the rules correctly. And we'll continue to hold our employees to a standard of where they're doing that. And get better, frankly.
Anybody on this, Blake?
I have an
Hold on.
additional motion. I just wanted to let you know that. So that
Okay, all right.
I don't think it's relevant enough to attach to Gayatri's, and so I just wanted
Okay, I'll just wait till we get there.
Thank you.
Okay, right here. Bring the mic.
Thank you. Good morning, Nicole Hart, First Vice Chair. To your question, I do want to say that after our meeting yesterday with the DNC and to Ms. Richardson's point, these things brought out, I guess, deficiencies that can be fixed. And so on behalf of myself and holding the officer's call, I know that we have been working on and will continue to work on creating legacy documents that will kind of contain the institutional knowledge that we obtained during our term, so that as we pass these things on, institutional knowledge stays with the party. And so that when other people come on, they're not in the same situation like our chairman and like a lot of us, where there just wasn't information passed on. And so at the Association of State Democratic Parties, they have best practices, but they also have supplemental documents for us to start from. So things that we can adjust and look at, so we have a starting point, and we're going to be working through that on our Vice Chair of Counties. Our Treasurer and Secretary will be doing that as well. So I did want to speak to that as an officer.
Okay, thank you.